I am privileged to announce our first panel, A New Wave of Advocacy, Grassroots Perspectives. We know that the disruptive nature of 2020 brought a dramatic change in how we conduct our personal and professional lives. It also exposed sharp inequities and transformed our views on what equitable language, justice, and support in an emergency means. We will introduce you today to a few examples of practical hands-on advocacy that took place in 2019 and 2020, confirming that there's a definite place for this type of advocacy in the future. However, it took the pandemic restrictions to permit the level of mobilization and outreach to bring this initiative to new champions. This panel will introduce some of them. Again, our designated hashtags today are hashtag OLRC22, hashtag LAD22, hashtag GLAD22, and hashtag Language Rights Matter. Our panel moderator, Grace Egan, is the Director of Language Services and Digital Strategy at Access Alliance, Multicultural Health and Community Services in Toronto. Grace began working as a community interpreter in 2007 and has been actively involved in various aspects of language access, including interpreter training, accreditation, quality standards, remote interpreting, and platform development and research. She's currently the chair of Ethics Review and co-chair of the Advocacy Committee at OCCI. And now for our panelists, we have Saif Mohammed, born in Myanmar, raised and educated in a large refugee camp in Bangladesh. He has called Kitchener home since 2016, where he continued his journalism studies at the first Rohingya professionally trained as a journalist in Canada. Simultaneously, he co-founded the Rohingya Development Initiative to address Rohingya genocide and educational opportunities for refugee youth all over the world. Currently, he is an executive director and community lobbyist advocating for the Rohingyas. Next, we have Martha. She's a 2S LGBTQ plus refugee sector leader, beginning her career in her hometown of South London, UK. She has worked in solidarity with displaced people since 2009. She began her Canada-based career at the Rainbow Railroad in 2016. Most recently, she joined the 519 as the manager of community engagement. The 519 is a community center and registered charity serving Toronto's 2S LGBTQ plus communities since 1976. Next, we have Jeannie Godfrey. She manages settlement services for the town of Banff. She's a part of a 9-person team and that has been assisting foreign-born community members in Banff, Canmore, and Lake Louise since 2011. Settlement Services is embedded in the multi-municipal organization of the town, but is externally funded by the IRCC. The settlement team works directly with clients, schools, employers, and agencies to ensure the needs and assets of the community members are understood and celebrated. And finally, we have Erica Chang, program manager at John Howard Society of York Region. She has an educational background in child and youth work and human resources. Erica has worked and advocated with human services sector for over 15 years, honing her experience and expertise in program development delivery specifically for individuals with criminal justice involvement. So help me in welcoming our panelists, and I'll hand it over to Grace to begin our panel.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And it is really exciting to be a part of the second Language Advocacy Day. So pretty much to echo what Nicole was saying, today in this first panel, we're going to be exploring various facets of language advocacy, language rights, and language access at the grassroots level. And it's so important to talk about grassroots because this is really the starting point of so much work around language rights. Our panelists will be sharing frontline perspectives of how language barriers have impacted the communities they serve, the benefits and improvements they've seen firsthand when better language support can be accessed, what other organizations can do to get started or just to keep driving their language access work. And finally, and not finally, but throughout, talking about how language rights is, as we've heard, human rights. It's a system issue and the change that we need to see. So I'm going to hand it over to the panelists to give us a little bit more information about the organizations they're working with, the work they do, and what they've seen, and then we'll go into some questions. So if I can hand it over to Saif to begin.
Hi.
So Saif, would you be able to just share a couple of minutes about the organization that you're working with, and just to tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing and what you've seen over the last couple of years?
Thank you, Grace, and everyone for participating, and thank you for inviting me here. I hope you all know the Rohingya story, history, and everything, what we are going through all over the world. So I would like to say there are only 1,000 Rohingya all over Canada. Approximately 650 are now living in rural regions. So the Rohingya people call Canada home since 2005. Since then, the Rohingya people have been facing different kind of problems to be settled or any kind of problems. And now, since 2015, the Rohingya community have become very focused in Canada when Canadian government have been supporting to them. Since I came to Canada in 2016, we have established a Rohingya organization called Canadian Rohingya Development Initiative. We have been advocating with these organizations in different levels, government, NGO, individual levels, to bring awareness about the Rohingya people. So recently we established a Rohingya Center of Canada, the physical community center for the Rohingya community, because the Rohingya community is so different to others, because the Rohingya are, I can say, very young community in Canada. So they need to establish themselves. They need support from others. So instead of going to others, helping the community through within themselves is a good options we found. So some of the Rohingya youth in Canada has established that, including me. So we are trying to do our best to give an opportunity to our community not to feel isolated from the Canadian society. So that's how we have been trying to do. I will discuss next in. So that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saif. And you know, we don't necessarily always think about youth when we first start talking about language rights. And so just thank you for making sure that we're talking about that today. Martha, can I hand it over to you?
Thank you, Grace, and hi, everybody. My name's Martha, as you have heard. I have been working in solidarity with displaced people since really I started my career in the UK in a range of different contexts, but most recently in Canada for the last 6 or so years. I've been working specifically in support of queer and trans displaced folks and newcomers more generally. I'm currently working at the 519 Community Centre as the Manager of Community Engagement, which you would have heard. The 519 is a community centre in downtown Toronto that is actually a City of Toronto agency and a charity that is committed to providing services to us LGBTQ communities in Toronto, and was established in 1976. So it's quite a long-standing organisation. We do that through an innovative model of providing service, space, and leadership to try and make real difference in people's lives. So we do that in terms of service. We provide needs-responsive, particularly peer-led programming as well, to serve some of the community's most marginalized individuals and subsections of the community. We also provide free, accommodating, and non-judgmental space to individuals, organizations, and non-profit groups to meet, organize, and work together in our space. We have a beautiful building in downtown Toronto. And we have an education and training department and a very active communications team through which we seek to advocate for about the kind of the realities, issues and needs of 2S LGBTQ people and communities, and like kind of bring those realities to the broader society to kind of elevate those things to the fore, and try to seek to provide space and comfort and make change for the very, very marginalised 2S LGBTQ communities that exist in downtown Toronto and across Canada and the world as well. I'm also involved in a national coalition of 2S LGBTQ serving organisations, for newcomer organisations, the focus of which is to advocate for systemic changes, policy, programmatic changes, particularly in Canada, the end of which would be creating more comfortable immigration pathways for displaced 2S LGBTQ people. And I've worked with various organisations throughout the years, providing things like anti-oppression training in a range of local and national contexts. So yeah, that's me, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Martha. And one thing that stood out was the immigration and settlement pathways, and just the efforts that we need to invest in making sure that those are successful, and how that's going to be related today when we're talking about language. All right, Jeannie, can I hand it over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me as part of this panel. I'm joining you from a very chilly Banff this morning. My name is Jeannie Godfrey, and as you heard, I'm part of a 9-person settlement services team at the town of Banff. Actually, since that introduction, our team has grown. We're now 11-person settlement team, where we've started our services in 2011, and we've really been developing services to support permanent residents since that time. So we are fully funded by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. And again, it's to provide settlement services to permanent residents of Canada. So that includes needs assessments, needs and asset assessments, referral services, information orientation services. We also have school-based services. We're working directly with students and school staff and divisions or boards as a whole as well. And we also deliver community connections. So what that looks like is it's delivered as one-to-one services to clients, family services, group services, or even whole community events. While we work directly with clients, we also work with agencies and institutions in our community that support our foreign-born residents, so that their needs certainly are better supported and understood. And it really allows us to benefit from the talents and the skills that our foreign-born community are bringing into Banff. We do have support services for our clients that includes interpretation and translation. And while we don't directly deliver language services, we do collaborate with our community partners that do so. A real benefit, I think, of our services is that our settlement team, we sit in the community services department at the town of Banff. So we are embedded in the municipality. It allows us to leverage the services of all the departments to better serve our foreign-born community. I'm really very happy to join you today and talk about the services that we provide and what it looks like on the ground for our clients. I think when you think of Banff, you may not think of necessarily immigration, but Banff is a hotbed for immigration. We have largely the path that our foreign-born community members are coming through is a semi-skilled path. They're coming in through economic streams for work opportunities. And while they may start as foreign workers, they transition to permanent residency and they do remain in our community. And so, you know, we look at about 35 to 40% of our community is foreign born. Certainly our school population reflects that at about the same percentage. And we have a very diverse community. Our services directly, while we are embedded in the town of Banff, we're partnered with our neighboring communities, with Canmore and Lake Louise. And so we're providing services across our community in our area. And while we deliver settlement services to permanent residents, we also have, you know, services that deliver free confidential services to foreign workers. And we also have a local immigration partnership that is sort of the umbrella organization over our town that ensures that the settlement and integration of our community members are well looked after. So we're working very collaboratively, and we have the full spectrum of supports, no matter where someone may be on their immigration journey. So thank you for having me today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Jeannie. Something that you mentioned that I hope that we're going to be hearing more of is the idea of knowledge mobilization and sharing what we've learned. So, you know, grassroots organizations, it's not just about the communities that we're immediately serving, but we are learning so much. And so other organizations, they're not in isolation. They're going to be supporting and engaging with our community members. So how can we share the lessons we've learned and our best practices so that it does become part of the system level response? All right, and so now Erica.
Thanks, Grace, and good morning, everyone. So as a not-for-profit agency, John Howard Society of York Region is most commonly known for the work we do with individuals and their families who have been impacted by involvement in the criminal justice system. When we unpack that, we see that it may include impacts to mental and physical health, employment, education, relationships, housing stability, food security, and so much more. If we add a layer of having a language barrier, all of these aspects are exacerbated. For those of us whose first language is English, the criminal justice system can already be a very overwhelming and complicated entity to be caught up in. Now imagine being in that position, but with a language barrier. The feelings of being overwhelmed, confused, frustrated, and intimidated are easily heightened. Many years ago, we were able to start providing interpreters to clients in one of our programs that receives financial support to do so. We eventually realized that it would be beneficial to be able to do this for clients accessing our other services. The challenge that we did encounter was that some of our programs are being delivered without any funding, and many of our programs that do receive funding do not have budgets with a capacity to adequately sustain acquiring interpreters. The work we do with our service users is to support them through their journey while also making communities safer. So having access to language support is integral to their success. When we run into challenges supporting individuals who need access to language, we see how it puts them at a disadvantage when really they want the same opportunities to success as everyone else. So I'm really pleased to be here today to participate in this panel to really help us move forward in advocating for access to language.
Thanks, Erica. And again, for touching on that language doesn't just impact your access to one particular type of service, and there can be a trickle-down effect at any point when a barrier is experienced in one aspect, and then it just touches everything in an individual's life. So if I now can take us into the first question. So when we talk about language rights, one of the objectives is, and we usually sort of almost all have it memorized, that it's about ensuring that everyone has equitable access to information and services regardless of the language they speak or sign. So with that in mind, asking you to think about whether it's specifically over the last 2 years and specific to COVID, or even before that, what challenges, language related challenges, have you seen? What impact have they had immediately, and what impact beyond that have you seen? So if we could just start, and again, maybe handing it over to Saif to start with that one too. So language related challenges.
Thank you, Grace. For me, since the first batch of Rohingya family arrived from Bangladesh refugee camp in 2006, the Rohingya community has become one of the fastest growing community in Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, Manitoba, and Alberta, and keep coming every day. So since then, the biggest problems they face daily in integrating life in Canada has been the language barrier. In Canada, the language barriers make the Rohingya community feel isolated, antisocial, and estranged, which often lead to hopelessness and deprivations of accessing essential services such as employment, education, healthcare, and community service. Consequently, people depend on language interpreters, but it doesn't eliminate the problems from its roots because healthcare service, community, and government agencies tend to use certified interpreters, language interpreters, whereas there is not a single certified Rohingya interpreters in Canada. Is really strange. Therefore, this service provider inevitably utilize uncertified incompetent interpreters, sometimes interpreter of similar dialect like Bengali. Reasonably, many Rohingya youth or students don't consider interpreting as a career because entering the field is not accessible due to the different requirements. For example, a couple of Rohingya students have completed training programs, language training programs in Ontario, but unfortunately, they are unable to graduate because of the language testing requirements. As in organizations, we have been working just now to develop and prosper the Rohingya community inside Canada, requesting assistance from different concerned agencies. Like one of the examples is MCIS we have been working with now. Having certified, if we get, for example, having certified Rohingya interpreters can be an advantageous in various aspects. And the atmosphere of the Rohingya language interpretations would be the warmest and kindest welcoming to the Rohingya newcomer in Canada. Rohingya refugee who survived genocide or the other atrocities in Myanmar or other refugee camp in different countries be exhausted and traumatized. And for the Rohingya language interpretation is the cultural access to trust building and comfort in a new world like Canada. So a Rohingya interpretation is therefore a must in order to acknowledge the existence of their language. As a refugee-led organizations, we do our part by running English communication classes and helping with the interpretations. We request all the related agencies who are giving service to the Rohingya peoples to come forward and allow us to break the language barriers and enable Rohingya community in Canada to fully engage in social, cultural, educational, and economical development. So the impact is much more, but we have been working to break that barriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Saif. Yeah, touching on the impact of lack of qualified language support, specifically interpreters, when it comes to trust building and engagement in so many aspects of daily life. All right, who would like to answer next? Martha, Erica, or Jeannie? So specific.
Yeah, it's Jeannie. I'd be happy to jump in. Two services that really stand out for me would be that were vitally important and access was limited was COVID-19 government financial supports as well as COVID-19 health information. So both had very high stakes with extremely negative consequences if the messaging was not completely understood. And here in Banff, approximately 80% of our community lost employment at the beginning of COVID-19. So huge impact. Lake Louise, we would be looking at almost 100% of the community lost employment. So accessing the government supports was critical. And this information was provided in our official languages. Unfortunately, our clients really needed that information provided in their first languages. Navigating the financial supports was challenging, as it was a system that was new to most. And so that can be challenging in and of itself. And the language was complex, which was an additional challenge. So most of our foreign-born community, they didn't have the language ability to be successful. Many applied for the wrong supports, which significantly delayed assistance, and many got no support at all. So for our team, it took months really to sort out the errors and line up support. And what that meant was that clients experienced dire consequences, everything from food insecurity to homelessness. And then when we think about the COVID-19 health information, which was so critically important to keep ourselves safe, our families safe, and our community safe, understanding 70, 80, or 90% of the information is not good enough. And so some of our clients were arriving from their home countries during this time. They were landing at the airports and they were being swept into the COVID-19 protocols. They had arrival testing, of course. They were given paperwork, giving papers of information about their 14-day quarantine, the mandatory quarantine, as well as the procedures for that mandatory COVID test to be taken on the 10th day of their quarantine. And so they were provided with test kits as well. But that information was exclusively provided in English. So these were refugee clients with pre-benchmark English language skills. So no interpretation or translation was provided. And so what that meant was they got friends, coworkers to help piece together what it was supposed to look like over the next 14 days. And what happened was for a lot of our clients, on the 14th day, or sorry, on the 10th day, they left their quarantine and they went in search of the COVID test. They understood that they needed to take a COVID test, but they didn't understand that that was to be done in their quarantine. And so they left, they went into local pharmacies, they even went to our local hospital to have those tests done. And they didn't understand that, again, that was meant to be done in their quarantine. And when we spoke with our clients about, what had happened and sort of unraveling the story, we realized that they had collected information, over the last few months, even prior to departing and arriving in Canada. They collected information from the sources that were available to them, friends and family, but they weren't official resources. It wasn't accurate information. And when we explained the system, how it was meant to be done, it was revealed that the test kit that they were given to do that 10-day COVID test, they thought that was a gift that had been given to them at the airport upon their arrival. So we can see that even with the best intentions of keeping themselves safe and the community safe, they just didn't have the information in order to do that and put themselves at risk as well as community at risk. And so again, just access to first language support is so critical.
Thanks, Jeannie. That's definitely something that was highlighted during COVID was when there's information intended for the public, thinking of the whole of the public as the patient. We need to make sure that it reaches all of the public, and the effort just has to go into that. So where are the gaps and how do we address them? Okay, Erica and Martha, any specific challenges over the last 24 months?
Sure. Yeah, I don't mind kind of jumping in on this. I mean, prior to the pandemic, we never imagined our services could be delivered virtually. We thought ourselves to be strictly in person, which obviously, along with everyone else, we ended up shifting to that virtual world in March 2020. With the courts and service providers suspending in-person services, there was this interim period of people being cut off from access. So people who required interpreters were often the last group to be notified or to receive communication about changes. I certainly echo what Jeannie mentioned about the challenges around fully understanding the health information that was being released on a regular basis. As a service provider, we had to ensure our communication with our community partners was strong and ongoing to be able to find out things like how is court functioning, how are applications for social assistance being made now, just so that we could kind of bridge services for individuals who otherwise wouldn't know how changes and processes were being made. And even once we did transition to our virtual platforms like Zoom, there were then the challenges for people who not only had language barriers, but then also lacked digital literacy. So again, as a service provider, we had to navigate how to make sure we are able to explain the technology to individuals who require interpreters, that we kind of take for granted being on Zoom every day and understanding simple things like, here, click the link, and then you have to make sure you turn the audio on, and simple things like that. Making sure that individuals are understanding that and are comfortable with that process so that they can go back to accessing the services.
You're making me think we need to add another word to that phrase of ensuring equitable access. I think we maybe also need to add in timely, and just, you know, equitable doesn't, you know, we know it doesn't mean equal, but what is the important aspect of equity in that moment? And absolutely, we can't have these catch-up legs like we saw over the past 24 months. Okay, Martha.
Yeah, so I would echo everything that everyone said so far. Of course, that language barriers impact access to every single type of service and community engagement that there could be for someone as they settle. The speed of multi-language health information with COVID, obviously everything was changing so quickly, and getting information in official languages that was up to date was sometimes confusing. So certainly getting it in a range of translations was quite difficult for folks. We similarly had an issue with relaying official communications from things like from bodies like IRCC and the Immigration and Refugee Hearing Board for folks who are in the process of going through some form of immigration process. Those systems were deeply delayed because of COVID, as were many things, and those delays caused a lot of distress. And of course, that stress was compounded when people didn't really understand why the delays were happening and what the communications were. So that certainly caused an issue. And something that I think has been ongoing pre-pandemic, but I think that has worsened, well, definitely has worsened, is housing and access to housing information. Obviously, somewhere safe to be is an incredibly important part of a successful settlement and integration journey for folks. And that, particularly in our urban centres, is increasingly hard to come by. And unfortunately, there are quite a lot of unscrupulous people who will take advantage of confusion to their benefit. And we've seen many newly arrived people with significant language barriers be exploited by landlords because they do not understand housing systems, eviction processes, bylaws around rent increases, all these sorts of things, and that information isn't accessible in their language of comfort or a language that they have proficiency in. And yes, digital literacy, huge, and that additional layer of distance that phone or video interpretation creates between service provider and service user really like adds to the possibility for miscommunication, misunderstanding, and confusion when accessing services, and understanding information that's being shared that oftentimes is vital to safety and security for folks.
So, thanks. I think we're definitely starting to get a solid picture of sort of a hub and spoke model here, where language rights are at the center of accessing all of our other rights and our services. You know, having touched on food insecurity, homelessness and housing, impact of having inequities in the legal system, it's all connected, and language is definitely there at the center. We can go on to our second question. So, having recognized the importance of language, each of your organizations has taken steps to improve engagement and reach of the supports that you provide. And some of them have even had some added unintentional benefits, so they went even beyond what you first intended to do. So, wondering if you can each share a specific example of a first step that you took that others can use as a best practice or a place to start their language access work. So, Jeannie, I sort of had you in mind to start us off with this one.
Absolutely. For me, it would be plain language. So the town of Banff recognized the answer to supporting our foreign-born residents is not just to grow our settlement team, and that the town as a whole is responsible for welcoming newcomers. So we have an initiative that we call the Municipal Integration Project, which embeds support for our foreign-born residents in all departments of the town. And the responsibility for supporting these newcomers, it doesn't exclusively lie with our settlement team. So the first step is in plain language policy. So all communication is with that lens. By making communication more easily understood, it becomes more accessible for all. So yes, it definitely supports our foreign-born community members, but it supports the community as a whole, because the average reading scores across Canada, I believe it's between the 7th and the 8th grade. So by using plain language guidelines, we're supporting the whole community to access services. Interpretation and translation in first language, it is still vitally important, but we avoid some of the scenarios that we experienced, things like when the housing department wanted community input, they advertised as hosting an open house. And that was met by the foreign-born community members with sort of a party. What party? Whose party? And recreation department as well. They were offering try it cross-country ski lessons. And our clients, they were asking, what country was it that they had to ski across? So even some of the more, what we think more simple messages going out to invite community, it wasn't landing. So plain language, it's doable, it's effective. It's very easy to implement. It doesn't require a budget. There's often free provincial training is available, easily accessed, and quick to bring on. And so that's the first step, I think, that has a significant impact in improving access to services.
Okay. So anyone else want to jump in about just simple, good places to start?
So we're really lucky at the 519 to have a really a broad range of languages spoken by our staff team. So suggesting this with the knowledge that we do have this as a benefit at our organisation, but something that is proving to be like a really beautiful and interesting project is we've started to have a few kind of non-official language-based social groups. And what we've seen happening, it was first off, really high attendance for the first time that this specific Arabic language group was started, and luckily led by an Arabic speaking member of staff, but we may expand this model to have like kind of volunteers lead these groups. Kind of in keeping with our commitment to provide space, we're very happy to provide space to this group of community members. And what we see happening is there's like a clear ownership over the group happening. It's not so much a kind of like service provider, service user scenario. It's a community group. The community feel very much ownership over this group, are making like a range of really interesting and like achievable suggestions about what that can look like, and also providing each other a space to resource each other, to provide social networks, which particularly to us LGBTQ displaced folks, they're often come to the country incredibly isolated, without access to community, often without the comfort of accessing their diaspora community within Canada as well. So having those spaces where there's a degree of comfort, of understanding, of shared language, of some kind of shared experience, where folks can share their concerns and help advocate for each other in a space where there are folks around who kind of have an understanding of housing systems, healthcare systems, etc., who can provide some kind of like some information and input where needed. And yeah, this group is really going beautifully, and in coming up with ideas of folks to invite to come in and share in their shared language on specific topics like wellness and well-being. So there's a kind of a small thing, which is just really about providing space for individuals to come in and grow their own groups and their own networks.
Chris, smiling, these are all such good examples. Okay, Erica and Saif.
I don't mind commenting on this. I think being aware of the community you serve is vital. Over the last few years, we've worked to improve and strengthen our agency data collection, while also looking at ways to ensure our work comes from an anti-racist and anti-oppressive lens. So as a result, we've been able to better identify language needs, which then in turn improves the quality and integrity of the programming we're able to deliver for clients.
If I say the first steps, you know, we have been working totally for a different people. I think some of you know that these people, the Rohingya people we have been working, they have lost their language for almost 50 years. Culture, everything. They were made stateless from their country for 60 years now. So it is so difficult to bring the broken piece together. So being in Canada, it is another problem for us, because every other settlement agencies who are working with different groups who are coming from the new countries they do have their own language. They do, even though they don't speak English. But the Rohingya community, the Rohingya language is not even recognized in Canadian language systems. So what the first steps we took is, I must thanks for that to my friends Zafar, who approached to MCIS, and he's the first one came out, spend his money and efforts to help the community. And then we had good in touch with MCIS, who help us get scholarship for 10 Rohingya interpreters. And having interpreters and having language training is not enough for the Rohingya community in Canada. So then we must go through LSAT or SELISAT task systems. Then we are recognized as a language, because in the Rohingya community, so many people have been facing for 5 years, 6 years in IRB, because they don't have language interpreters. So the first step we have took is we came out with 10 Rohingya young peoples to go through MCIS scholarships and to complete this test, and then to go to LSAT or CELISAT test. Then we can think of helping the community and break the barriers of the language, Rohingya language in Canada. Thank you.
So kind of by accident, as you four were talking, I was making some notes, and the abbreviation of PL came up for all of these items in the toolkit. So the idea of peer-led. So when we're creating our programs and co-designing our programs. So let's imagine that peer-led is one item in our toolkit. PL for plain language. It's something that benefits all of us. So another item in our toolkit. For Erica mentioning data collection, this is about capturing preferred language. So another PL. And then safe language training and building capacity. This is about preservation of the language. So you know, anyone who knows me knows I love my acronyms and abbreviations. So now I'm just thinking of our PL toolkit and how we've got 4 really good starting points for what others can do just to get started or to keep moving in this space. Okay, so I'm just looking at time, and so I guess, okay, one thing that everyone has mentioned has been around language interpreting, and so it's a support that each of your organizations has been able to access, either because there's some dedicated funding or there has been a generous partnership that's allowed you to have access to it. So if we speak specifically about this tool, what would you say have been the advantages that you've seen immediately when you have access to professional interpreting? Martha, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. We're incredibly lucky and grateful to be partnered with MCIS over the last several years to provide interpretation and translation also. And I mean, the benefits are huge and almost indescribable. It starts from like the very beginning of connection with us for folks who don't have an official language, as we are informed consent forms that we use to share with people when they start to first access services through the 519 have been translated into many languages. So from first contact, folks have a chance to kind of see what they're getting into, really, in terms of accessing support from us and what they can expect, and what they should be aware of as they engage in that relationship. And it goes through to all parts of how we work and what we do to support people. The interpretation line is used by our settlement workers. It's used by our legal clinics as well. It's used by our friendly check-in program, which particularly during the pandemic has been like just invaluable in connecting with really marginalized newly arrived folks, particularly trans people of color, and also the older adults in our community who pre-pandemic were coming in to interact in social spaces and receive food and all sorts of things on a regular basis, and then were cut off from that community network and that human connection that they had. So having that interpretation for the friendly check-ins has just been wonderful. To have peers, again, peer-led, have peers of those individuals, give them a call and check in on at least a weekly basis, see how they're doing, make sure they have the basic things that they need in their life, like food, and have a little bit of a chat and an interaction with someone who they can relate to, even if they are speaking through an interpreter. Then access to legal advice. Our legal clinics provide advice on housing, criminal law, immigration, refugee law, things that relate to gender changes as well. So really vital things that allow people to engage in systems and advocate for their own rights and their security. We use the phone interpretation for that also. And then for settlement, the settlement workers provide, they talk people through settlement planning, they connect people with healthcare, with lawyers, with employment services, with such a broad range of things. So having access to that has been amazing and magical and great, because we've been able to support so many more people in such a richer and more useful way. If you can't understand the information that someone is sharing with you, then you can't use it properly, and you can't consent to them using you can't really truly consent to them working on your behalf, advocating for you, connecting you, providing adequate referrals. All these things, they don't work if the individual, the subject of the support, doesn't understand what's happening correctly. And even if that's a minor miscommunication or misunderstanding, it can have huge implications for someone's life. So having access to that has been really just such a wonderful and invaluable thing.
Thank you. Saif.
Yeah, I will be very brief for that. I agree with what Martha mentions. There's a lot of benefits for having professional interpreters or professional language, what do you call language interpreters? I mean, so for example, now having, you see the advantage of benefit of having the professional interpreters in our community, our people. As I mentioned, I think waited for 15 years to get a driving license. Imagine, for 15 years because of the language barrier. For 5 years, they waited to get a jobs because of the language, and then they felt shame of themselves to go to Ontario work for the money that the Ontario provides. So they are ashamed of the other community members who are working. So just now having some of the professional interpreters in our community, first of all, we are helping our community first, but we are also in position to help the service providers. Whoever needs the service, they call us, and then we can give easily the service, which didn't happen 15 years ago, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago. So that's a great advantage. I don't want to go further because of the time. So thank you so much for mentioning these questions.
So if I can just jump in, you touched on something that is so critical when we're talking about language support. When we always say, do we need an interpreter? Because it's not just the individual who has limited English or French. We, as the service providers, have limited proficiency in our client or patient's language. So exactly like you said, it's also supporting the service providers to do the work that they need to do. And if we share in the we, I think we're coming at this in a healthier way.
Yes, I'll just jump in quickly. I do want to echo what has been said. Just, why professional services? I would say just 2 words: confidentiality and accuracy. We need, and our clients need to make informed decisions, and that requires information. Professional services ensures that accuracy of information, and it maintains confidentiality. So friends and family, volunteer volunteer language banks, they can't provide this. They can't provide the confidentiality, and they can't necessarily provide the accuracy that's required. So equitable access to information and services are at risk if we do not have those professional services available to clients and as well to service providers.
Thanks. Erica, any?
Yeah, I think when we just think of the human aspect, it means that our clients can maintain their dignity while accessing our services. Clients often experience shame and embarrassment when they're having to access service after having been involved with the criminal justice system. Not knowing how to speak the dominant language just contributes to that shame and embarrassment. Similarly to what Martha mentioned, when clients have access to professional interpreting, they can become comfortable with the process. They have that opportunity to fully understand and consent to what they'll be participating in, and they'll be able to get the most out of their time with our agencies. From the service delivery aspect, it means that we've been able to reach more people. And when we're considering people involved with the criminal justice system, that means that we've been able to help more people make positive changes and move forward in their lives. By being able to successfully complete programming with us, not only have they had the same opportunity to take away the tools and resources as their English-speaking counterparts, but for some, it also means that they've been able to reunite with loved ones, maybe avoid complications with immigration status, or even maintain employment. So again, a lot of things that those of us who are English-speaking take for granted, the language interpreter and access to that just helps mitigate certain things for people.
So I think we're just looking at the time. I think we have time for one more question. And so I was going to sort of ask, what would you add to make the case for that language rights is a system level issue? And what do we need to call on our leaders and policymakers to do? So either talk about that, or if there's any question that you wanted us to ask you. And so we have some time now just to go around. So either how is this a system level issue, and what do we, what are the calls to action for leaders, policymakers, funders, or just take the floor and ask your own question of each other. Erica, if you want to lead on this one.
Sure. I think on a larger scale, we need to look at access to language as an accommodation need, the way we do so with other things. We could say that we need policies that ensure people are provided with interpreters when accessing various services, but we then need to take it a step further to ensure the sustainability and affordability of it. Not all individuals are in a financial position to be able to afford an interpreter themselves. So we need to determine how those individuals can be supported. Organizations providing the services don't always have the funding available to carry the costs associated with obtaining professional interpreters from language service companies. And in fact, some of our existing language service companies are also not for profit, which results in their own budget limitations. So we kind of see this cycle of limitations happening. And for us, with our clients, when they have attended for the court appearances, they're provided with language interpreters at that point. However, once they leave the court and are on their own, they're left to independently navigate unfamiliar systems. If the overarching goal of our system is to successfully reintegrate people, then there needs to be a concerted effort into providing the support with language access throughout their reintegration journey. And I know for many of us in our various sectors, we're engaging in that movement to be anti-racist and anti-oppressive. For me, I think that ensuring language access for individuals who require it is just that one more step toward these movements.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for just sort of taking it to a broader sort of accessibility level for that.
I'll jump in just very quickly. Thank you, Erica. I think when you spoke to that sustainability and affordability, certainly there are many critical services that are required, and those services require interpretation, and it's certainly a challenge to fund all that is necessary. And so that, speaking to that sustainability and affordability, but we certainly have seen some great success with centralized interpretive services. For example, the medical field, being able to access a centralized system. And so supporting a centralized interpretive system, interpretation system, and allowing those critical government services to tap into that, I think would be immensely beneficial. It really isn't unlike the service that MCIS has been providing over the last few years of allowing organizations to tap into these professional services, but doing it you know, on a larger scale, and ensuring that that everyone has access to interpretive services for those critical services that they require, the government services, and being able to support a centralized interpretive services system, I think would be really beneficial for communities as a whole.
Thanks, Jeannie.
Yeah, I'd like to add that, funding for interpretation, I think we've seen in the last few years is just imperative. It needs to happen, particularly for any official access to official services and settlement services. It should be part of any kind of government settlement funding consideration, that if you're doing settlement, you need access to professional interpretation and translation. And I also wanted to add that I think that there needs to be more of a cohesive effort. I know that MCIS is making strong progress in this direction to ensure that interpretation services, those providing and those in the network of providing, have had adequate training about us LGBTQ individuals and experiences. There's a lot of queer migration to Canada. A significant percentage of individuals who come here to settle either through economic pathways or as displaced individuals are gender or sexuality diverse. And it is harmful to encounter microaggressions that relate to race. It's also harmful to encounter those that relate to sexuality and gender. And that is something that people do experience in interaction with all services at all levels in healthcare, justice, and ensuring that folks who are the conduit, the communication pathway for individuals, interpreters, have that understanding, that competency, and that respect is really key to ensuring the safety and protection of people as they access services.
For me, not much. Sorry. For me, not much. In my opinions, the truth is that that recently came to our attentions. We have to approach to the right people, as you all mentioned, for the funding, for the trainings, for other things. One thing is clear, that we are pulled in different directions. Sometimes we neglect the fact that settlement often starts with the language as much as it needs job and educations. So we need attentions from the governments, organizations, and coalitions such as ours, yours, to help address these systematic barriers. It is not something like somebody can do alone. So we have to work together until I think for a long run. Thank you.
So Eliana and Nicole, I'm just wondering if we've seen any questions come up in the chats for the panelists for our last few minutes.
Yes, Grace, there is one question for Marta in particular. If Marta can please talk about how language affects a kind of homogenized Western idea of gender and sexuality that colonizes the multiplicity of global sexual differences. So how language affects this homogenistic view on sexuality and in a way colonized view on gender.
Yeah, thank you for that, that question. Yeah, how language is gendered is obviously dependent on the language that you're speaking. Unfortunately, English is a gendered language, not all are. And something that happens, actually, was speaking with Grace about this, it's not just also about the gendered parts of language, it's about the way in which we infuse our interactions with people with assuming gender. A lot of affectations that relate to politeness are gendered, like a sir and a ma'am, etc., etc. And it is, gender is something that we have imposed on the world around us. And we, dependent on the language we speak, we assume and force people into gender binaries. And that is absolutely something that is connected to colonization. Many cultures around the world have had, from time immemorial, a more expansive notion of gender than the European and colonized European countries' ideals and understandings of gender. And I think that in Toronto in particular, I mean, Toronto is the area of Turtle Island that I know best. The language, the understanding, the richness and understanding and conversation around gender and how language impacts people's experiences of gender is really, it's such an interesting and in such an interesting and progressive moment. And I think it's really important for us to make that strong connection between how cultures and the languages that they come with have colonized other countries, other nations, understandings of what is an acceptable form of human and what are acceptable genders. So I really value that connection that you've made there, Nuzhat. And I'm not sure if I'm actually responding to your question there, but just to kind of elaborate on that a little bit, it is something that is an interpretation. It's a gauze, a film that we put over the world to interpret other people and push people into uncomfortable places where perhaps they shouldn't or don't want to be, through how we see them and how we address them in a gendered way. And I do think it's something we have a lot of work to do in deconstructing that all across the world and certainly across Turtle Island.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions that have come up from the attendees?
We have a few general questions that we sent earlier, but I have a feeling these are responded to. Let me just look once more. Is there anything that we did not ask you about that you wanna, we only have a few minutes left in these closing statements. We have a 11:10 hard stop.
So even just sort of any key closing points that you want everyone to walk away with? The four of you close with anything.
I would love to say that, you know, we do have interpretive services, we have translation services, there's settlement services, there's lots of different ways, and certainly organizations like settlement services that are funded to support newcomers in our community. But I think we need that broader lens of saying everyone has a role to support settlement and integration in their communities. So it's reaching out to those that might not think of themselves as having a role or needing to have a role. And I think that's, you know, where success is going to come, is that everyone takes on part of that responsibility and becomes part of that solution. Because I think it was said in the chat earlier, we can't continually just fund interpretive services, translation services, settlement services, and other supports for newcomers. The need is growing, but if we can really engage other members that might not think of themselves as traditionally supporting newcomers to come on board, that is going to be extremely helpful in the long run.
Erica, Martha are safe. Anything to add? I think when we were mentioning the calls to action of looking for a more standardized and centralized solution. So let's look at language rights as something that affects all of us. It affects all of our services. It should be thought of in every service delivery where we're thinking about, if we have some desired outcomes, how do we make sure that at every interaction, from planning to service delivery, that we're asking the question of, can everyone understand? Can everyone engage? Is language a barrier at any point? And then let's address it. So it's not specific to any particular community group, any particular service, but it's a question we need to be asking all the time. And we need a concerted effort across the country for addressing it. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to hand it back to Nicole and Eliana, and just thank you so much to the panelists. That was so insightful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Grace, Safe, Martha, Jeannie, and Erica for that compelling discussion about how disruption is sometimes an opportunity for change and growth. Please note that all these conversations are recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel in a few days. So again, please follow our threads on social media channels and use the hashtag LAD22, Language Rights Matter, and hashtag OnPoly to contribute and comment what you're listening to, what inspires you, and what challenges you. Let's start an active conversation on some of these.